Hey everyone, welcome to the UFO live stream. Today's guest is going to be Rey Hernandez, and he will be talking about his upcoming book, The Greater Reality. But more importantly, Rey is going to be a speaker at the Ozark Mountain UFO Conference coming up in April, from April 8th till 10th. So as of today, we are literally 2 weeks out. The official beginning of the conference would be 2 weeks from now on Friday. And I'm certainly hoping that some of you, if not most of you, can make it. On the link below in the description, you will find the registration link, and you can still buy your streaming tickets or your tickets in person. And we have quite a lot of people that are excited that we're back in person and it's back up and open again. So if you would like to mingle and socialize again and get to see and meet some of these speakers in person, this will be your chance. Also, in the description below, I have some links for Rey, specifically an Amazon link to his book, Beyond UFOs. Later on, I'll ask him when I have him on when exactly the Greater Reality book is going to be coming out. And then some upcoming links that are not active yet, but will be, I believe, starting April 1st. So Rey, as always, has a lot of great information to tell and many things to talk about. So I will do my best to have him on as soon as possible here. Just want to cover some quick things here. So we will do some Q&A with Rey. If you would like to ask him some questions, those who are watching on Twitch or YouTube, you can simply in the comment section submit a question. Make sure to put 3 asterisks before your question, so that way it pops out at me, and I know it's not just a chat going on amongst yourselves there. And but if you would like to specifically talk to or directly talk to Rey, you can join the Telegram group that's going on live right now, and they're listening to voice only. And so when the time comes, you can simply raise your hand, and I'll add you to my queue, and we'll give you a chance to talk to Rey. But yeah, the link for the Telegram group is in the description below as well for Telegram. And as always, everything is in the description. All right, everything seems to be running great. So let me bring in Rey here. Welcome, Rey. Thanks for being on. How are you?
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you.
All right. Well, I'm glad you're back. And so Rey is not necessarily going to go over a presentation this time. The whole point is for you to come to the conference and check it out. I'm sure it's going to be very exciting, and the new information that they have found. And so, Rey, can you please give me just a little bit of background how that came about and what other people are involved? Because you're not the only one involved in writing this book, correct?
That's correct. We have 5 co-editors, which are myself, Dr. Rudy Shields, who is an emeritus professor at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. We have Dr. Michael Grosso, who taught philosophy for over 45 years. He himself is an experiencer, and he's written approximately 10 books, all in the area of the paranormal, academic books. And then we have Dr. John Clemo, also an experiencer, and he taught psychology, again, for over 45 years. And he's written several books on the paranormal and consciousness. And his book, titled Channeling, was translated to over 18 languages. And then, last but not least, is Dr. Jeffrey Long, who's now recently retired. And he's one of the world's leading researchers on near-death experiences. And to the best of my knowledge, has the largest database of both NDE experiencers and out-of-body experiencers. And he's written several books based upon the data. I believe now he's up to 13,000 people that have taken his surveys. He has multiple survey questions in his website. And so the 5 of us are the co-editors. And then our book is titled A Greater Reality, The New Paradigm of Non-Local Consciousness, the Paranormal, and the Contact Modalities. And we're going to have 4 volumes. The first 2 volumes are theoretical in nature, primarily written by numerous PhD academics and medical doctors. And then the last two volumes are written by experiencers. Almost all of them are individuals that have had experiences via 3 or 4 or more different types of contact modalities. So not just someone that has seen a UFO, someone that's had an out-of-body experience, someone that's only had a near-death experience. No, it's someone that's had a near-death experience. They've also had various out-of-body experiences. They've also seen various UFOs. They've also seen deceased people. And many of these people are highly trained professionals, like medical doctors, academic professors. So that's going to be volumes 3 and 4 of our book.
So, Ray, what I specifically love about when you were doing the Beyond UFOs, how you had the different breakdowns of all the data collected. Will you have something similar again in the Greater Reality?
Well, the Greater Reality, what the purpose of that book is to introduce this new paradigm, this new way of thinking, and which is quite complex. And then later on, we're going to be undertaking a comprehensive academic research study similar to the one that we did of UFO contact experiencers, except we're going to be doing it for the experiencers of the contact modalities, basically of all the paranormal. We want to see how they're all interrelated. And so, again, we're going to be having quantitative and qualitative surveys to administer to individuals all over the world in multiple languages. But the purpose of our first book is to introduce these concepts, which are concepts that are not easily digestible.
So, Ray, is there something you can then share with us about the book without revealing too much, since, of course, we want to leave it for the conference?
Sure. The book, the first half of it, the first 2 volumes, we anticipate that they're going to be approximately 600 pages each. So 2 thick books. And it's all going to be discussing 2 basic issues. One is that that consciousness is primary. That means that our 3D physical reality is an illusion. We sense it via the 5 senses, hearing, touching, smelling, tasting, etc. But these 5 senses are not the true nature of our reality. There's something much, much more complex, and it involves our own individuated consciousness, who we are as a soul, as a spirit, as an eternal entity within a greater reality. Within the mind of God, if you want to use this term, but we're not referring it from a religious perspective. And so it's a very complex philosophy that's been talked about since the dawn of mankind. I guess it was first put in written language with the ancient Vedic tradition. And then from there, it's been passed down through all of the major cultural traditions, mystical traditions, from Middle Eastern, from Greek philosophy, from indigenous cultures in Africa and Latin America, etc. Roman philosophy, even European philosophy of the mind discussions. And that is that our reality is not what we think it is, but it's much, much more greater, much more expansive. More recently, individuals are discussing a virtual reality model, but this is a virtual reality model based upon the spirituality that we are eternal spiritual beings. So, and then we go into the separate topics areas. The first topic area is to discuss what is consciousness. And we're going to be having various articles. One particular article is going to have 2 of the co-editors are professors in the medical school at the University of Virginia. Dr. Bruce Grayson, who was the leading academic on near-death experiences. And he's affiliated with the University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies. Then we have Dr. Jim Tucker, and he took over the work on reincarnation by Dr. Ian Stevenson. And both of these individuals have been on the faculty at the medical school at the University of Virginia for over 25 years. And then the other author is Dr. Larry Dawsey, who's a major publisher on the topic of consciousness, and he's also a medical doctor. And finally, we have a retired professor from Stanford University, Dr. Stanley Krippner, and he was a professor of physics. And so these are the 4 articles of this one chapter. And then we have about 4 or 5 different chapters, all discussing this whole aspect of what is consciousness. And then the second grouping area is a grouping area titled non-local consciousness. And that area is focused on the late Dr. Edgar Mitchell's quantum hologram theory of consciousness, which is extremely complex. We are publishing his magnum opus article, which has never been published before except for in an astrophysics journal, in the Journal of Cosmology, whose director is Dr. Rudy Shields. And the article is difficult to read and has physics language in it, but it's not meant for a physicist. It's meant for the average reader. And that goes into how our mind, not our brain, but how the human mind is able to tap into information fields of our reality and is able to retrieve information like ESP, precognition, and other parapsychological type of events. And then we have Dr. Glenn Ryan, who's a professor of quantum biology. He received a PhD at the University of London in biochemistry. And what he did is he took Edgar Mitchell's article and he extended it to the contact modalities and to contact with non-human intelligence. And a very important article as well. And so we have 3 or 4 articles that talk about Edgar Mitchell's very important theory of consciousness and the quantum hologram. Another way of thinking of a quantum hologram is that we are living inside a virtual reality. And it's how we as human beings are interacting within this virtual reality. And then we have articles on the different contact modalities. We have roughly 11 articles on the topic of UAPs and UFOs. And all of these articles are alternatives to the materialist nuts and bolts approach to ufology. And I won't go into all of those details, but basically after you finish reading that, you're going to be blown away. You never thought of ufology from this radical approach. Then we have a whole section on near-death experiences, a whole section on out-of-body experiences, remote viewing, clairvoyance, and astral traveling. Again, each of these subjects have, that particular area has more than 5 articles. We have articles on the topic of ghosts, spirits, spiritual attachments, and those areas of the deceased. And then numerous other areas of the contact modalities. And then we have another category about future research of the organization. And then we have about 6 articles that are like conclusion type of articles that wrap up all of these topics together. And so that's going to be 2 volumes. It's going to be close to 1,200 pages. And it will provide you with a theoretical foundation to begin to understand the complex nature of our true reality, which is a reality based upon consciousness. And then volumes 3 and 4 are articles written by major contact experiencers. We're going to have close to 80 articles, and they're describing their experiences. And I could describe one as an illustration.
Please do.
Yeah. One is her name is Dr. Melinda Greer. She was very, very apprehensive about talking personally about her experiences. I actually met her physically for the first time at the Arkansas UFO conference, together with another lady, another major experiencer. I consider these two ladies as two of the top three major experiencers I've ever met. And both of them I met at your conference. Let me talk about Dr. Melinda Greer. Dr. Melinda Greer now is recently retired, and now she's out in the open. We also interviewed her for our documentary, which I could talk about later on. So basically, here you have a woman that works in a hospital, saving the lives of children. She's a pediatric emergency room medical doctor. And this woman has seen 12 UFOs, most of them very, very large, very, very up close. I think 5 different times she saw these huge triangle crafts. Many of them were from horizon to horizon that blanketed all the skies. The times that she did see them at night, they blocked out all the stars in the sky. Twice she saw this with her husband. Um, and there were many different types of these UAPs that she saw. It wasn't just a triangle. Those are just the most common one that she described to me, but there were many other different types. She's also has had two near-death experiences. The first one when she was a child, and the second one when she was already a medical doctor. And so the second NDE was unbelievably profound. And I'll just give you a little snippet of it. And in that near-death experience, she described how who she was, the spirit, the essence, the information of Dr. Melinda Greer that was accumulated through her entire lifetime, how that information was uploaded to like a central database, like a central computer. And again, it reflects back to the hypothesis of us living in a virtual reality inside the mind of God, and how we return back to the mind of God when we die. And she describes it in detail, that whole process. And again, if you can see my background here, it's binary code, zeros and ones. And that reflects the fact that we are living in a reality based upon information. So in her near-death experience, she described what happened to her. She described being in this other reality, very, very detailed. And then she describes of her going back to her body. She was like about a foot on top of her body, seeing her dead body underneath her. And she was just looking at it, for like over a minute. And then all of a sudden, she just went back into her body, and she described that whole experience. And she also described how the experience started, where she first floated out of her body. So it was very, very detailed. She's had two of those. She also discussed about her out-of-body experiences. She also discussed when she was young, she used to have many astral travel experiences that were actually teaching lessons. And let me describe a couple of them for you. One was that she was a little girl, and she asked her mother, she saw in the news of this man that robbed a bank, and in the process of robbing a bank, that he killed two people in the bank. So she asked her mother, I said, Mom, how could this man just kill two innocent people? How could this possibly be? And so her mother gave her an explanation, but she wasn't satisfied with that explanation. So that evening when she was asleep, all of a sudden, her ethereal body, her consciousness appeared in the getaway car of that man that had robbed the bank. So he was there physically right in front of her. Okay. And then all of a sudden, she began to read his mind. Okay. And that's very, very common in a near-death experience, and also in out-of-body experiences, where you're actually reading the mind of someone else, and someone else is able to read your mind. And also, all communication is telepathic. So she began to read this man's mind, and she discovered was that this man was saying, I'm never going back to that jail. I'm never going back to that jail. He had been raped, violated, abused, and it was a horrific experience. And so when the security guard pulled out a gun, okay, he had to kill him because he said he's never going to go back and be violated again in that jail. It was a horrible experience for him. And other information about this man's life, came to her because she was like a spirit in the passenger side of this man in the getaway car. So after that, when she woke up, she now had her answer of why did this man kill these two innocent people, and it was because he did not want to go back to that jail because he had such an abusive experience in that jail, a horrific experience. And so then there was another experience that she described, which when we interviewed her in our documentary, was that when she was a girl, she mentioned that there was in second grade, there was the two boys that liked to play with girls. They didn't want to play with the other boys. They liked to play with dolls. They were very feminine in their outlook. So they acted more like girls than boys. So she went to her mother and she asked her mother, Mom, I've got these two boys in my class, but they're like girls. They want to play with dolls. They rather play with us. And I said, how could this be? And so her mother gave her an explanation and she wasn't satisfied with it. So then she described her when she was sleeping that night, how all of a sudden she was in a metropolis, a huge city, which she had never been in a huge city before. And she described entering an office. The office had all this modern furniture, which she had never seen before. And then there was a man behind this elegant modern desk, very, very handsome, dressed in a fancy suit. And he told her, Melinda, please sit down. So she sat down and she described her legs as hanging because she was still very small. And then he asked her a question. He said, Melinda, how do you love your mother? How much do you love your mother? And so she said, oh, my God, my mother? Oh, I cannot describe how much I love my mother. And then went on to tell this man how much she loved her mother. And so this man said, well, Melinda, the way you love your mother, I love another man. Okay. And then began to tell her that love is eternal. It's throughout the whole universe. And it doesn't matter whether, what type of relationship is, because love is universal throughout our reality. And I just happen to love another man, And so, he began to tell her all these details. So when she woke up the next day, she had the answers, why these boys are acting that way. Okay. And then she said that these experiences were from the age of 3 years old all the way to like the age of 11 or 12 years old. So these were, almost nightly type of teaching experiences. Another thing about Dr. Melinda Greer is that she's had 3 Sasquatch experiences. 2 of them were very up close. Okay. So in our book, she describes some of those stories and truly unbelievable. Okay. And then after her second near-death experience, she began to see deceased people in her hospital, people that were like going through walls. There was one man that she called out to him. She said, what are you doing here? And she described the man as very pale, very, very sickly. All of a sudden, the man looked at her and he like ran right through the elevator doors that were closed. Okay. And she had numerous experiences like that. And some of them were witnessed by other people as well in the hospital. So here is a medical doctor who's saving the lives of children at a major medical hospital, but yet she's having so many diverse experiences via the contact modalities. So that's just an illustration of the over 70 people that we have in our book. These individuals that have had everything in the kitchen sink. And that is just an example from an experiencer perspective of what we are describing from a theoretical perspective, that all of these experiences, okay, need to be studied as one integrated phenomenon. Okay. Right now, they're being seen as separate and distinct. For example, in ufology, okay, these major researchers that go to all these major conferences, okay, you would ask them, well, do you think that there's a relationship between out-of-body experiences and UFOs? Okay, the overwhelming majority would say, of course not. Do you think there's a relationship between near-death experiences and ufology and UFOs? Again, the vast majority will say absolutely not. Okay, et cetera, et cetera. You repeat the different paranormal contact modalities, they would say the same answer. I went to a conference. This was about 5 years ago on near-death experiences. It was the International Association for Near-Death Studies, which is the major NDE research organization in the world. They had their annual conference in Orlando. So I was introduced by two friends of mine that were individuals that had many different types of experiences. They've seen UFOs, they've seen ghosts and spirits, they've had near-death experiences. And so one was lecturing at the event, and the other one was going to the event, and we met up there. And so they introduced me to the leaders of that organization, the president, the vice president, and some of the other individuals that ran that organization. So I asked them the same question. Do you think that ufology is related to near-death experiences? What are you talking about? Of course not. Well, do you think that out-of-body experiences, people that go out of their body all the time, do you think that's related to near-death experiences? No. Well, OBEs is part of the early stage of an NDE phenomenon. The actual two phenomena are totally separate. Well, how about people that see ghosts and spirits? Of course not. No. Well, what I found out later on was that one of the previous presidents, okay, her name is Yvonne Kaysen. She at one time was the president of that organization. She's had 5 near-death experiences. Well, and she's a medical doctor, retired medical doctor. Well, guess what? Yvonne has had everything in the kitchen sink as well. She's seen UFOs. She's had numerous out-of-body experiences. She's seen deceased people. And she's written several books that have talked about that, okay? So that's why she left that organization, because they were so closed-minded. They just wanted to focus just on UFOs, okay? When I went for my documentary and I interviewed Dr. Raymond Moody, we also interviewed Dr. Jeffrey Long. Previously, I was warned by Dr. Kenneth Ring, who's a retired professor of psychology at the University of Connecticut. He had written a book back in 1986 titled The Omega Project. That book is one of the very few statistical academic research studies that focuses on UFO contact experiences. Well, what he did in that book is he applied the same survey to 85 people that had near-death experiences and also 85 people that had what is commonly called an abduction experience. And what he determined was that these individuals are having the same phenomena. They're having the same experience, okay? One of the areas that we focused close to 70 of his questions on was, how did these people change? How were they before? And how are they now? Well, what he determined was that the overwhelming majority of these people no longer fear death. This is from both groups, the abductees and the NDE experiencers. People much more spiritual, okay? People that were atheists all of a sudden are spiritual. People that were materialistic oriented. I need to get a new Mercedes-Benz every year. All of a sudden, that old Honda Accord is fine, okay? People that didn't care about environmental issues all of a sudden are major tree huggers, okay? The environment is extremely important. People that were nasty to each other, treated each other horribly, all of a sudden they become much more loving to each other, okay? People that were not consciously aware of their role in the nature of their reality, all of a sudden are now much more consciously aware, okay? And there were 70 questions of how these people changed and transformed. And what he was able to demonstrate statistically was that these people changed in exactly the same way. So we borrowed those 70 questions and we applied it to the research study of the Dr. Edgar Mitchell FREE Foundation. But now it wasn't 85 people in 2 groups. Now we had 4,300 people. And what we discovered was that these 4,300 people, okay, again, depending on the question asked, was between 75 to 90% of these people totally were transformed for the positive. Okay? Originally, they had viewed their experiences as negative, but now they were totally transformed. Okay? So that's what you're going to be getting in our in the experiencer sections. You're going to be getting over 70 individuals, experiencers, that talk about their experiences. Dr. Melinda Greer, initially, she was scared as hell by her experiences. Okay. Whitley Strieber, a very famous UFO contactee, years ago, he called himself an abductee. Horrified. These abductions were horrible, right? Now he has a totally different viewpoint of abductions. Maybe it wasn't an abduction. Maybe it's a little bit more complicated. Okay. And now he prays to God, he says, to this intelligence. He prays to this intelligence for giving him spirituality, for giving him insights. Kathleen Martin, another major researcher in the field of ufology. She had worked primarily with abductees for the first 25 years of her research. Now she just recently published a book about her spirituality, how she first started with viewing it as a physicalist abduction phenomenon. And now this woman sees it all under consciousness and spirituality. Same thing with Whitley Strieber. Well, guess what? We had 4,300 people that took our surveys. The overwhelming majority of these people view it exactly the same way. Okay? Not in the very beginning. In the very beginning, 37% of these people viewed this as highly negative, the contact phenomenon. But now, almost all these people, just like Kathleen Martin and Whitley Strieber, are now Mr. and Mrs. Love and Light. Totally different radical approach. So that's what our book is going to be about. It's going to be introducing to humanity this new paradigm. And that topic is in our book, of the relationship between consciousness and the contact modalities. And we're going to be arguing two basic theses in our book. One is, number one, that consciousness is primary. And I'll explain that and articulate that later on after I get to breathe a little bit. And the second thesis is that all of the contact modalities are currently being viewed as separate and distinct phenomena, like they belong in their own little box and they have nothing to do with each other. We're saying the total opposite, that all of the contact modalities are all interrelated. Why? Because each of these involve a manipulation of space-time, which leads to the hypothesis that these might be interdimensional in nature and that they are consciousness-based. So that's the basic thesis of our book. So I'll pause for you to ask me another question.
No, thank you for that. Well, basically, I have two questions. One would be, well, because it's several authors, as you mentioned, was there some kind of determining factor of why it's because most of the time it's always been you talking, and I'd love to listen to you, but especially if you have five authors, is there some kind of agreement you guys come together to say, okay, we all do this, together, but you will be publicly representing, or at least that I've only seen was you. I don't know about the other ones, if they're doing similar things which you are. That's the first question. And then a second one would be more about, so most of people watching here and generally, they are very enthusiastic about the everything UFOs, right? And you and I kind of talked about this a little bit earlier. If you're not a experiencer, if you haven't been, let's say, haven't seen a UFO or anything like that, especially when it comes to consciousness, are there specific steps somebody could take to kind of start going down that consciousness route if they want to see and understand the same things that most of the experiencers have seen and experienced? So basically those two questions, if you wouldn't mind touching on them, please.
Yeah. First of all, let me sort of make a correction there. It's not whether you've seen a UFO. That's not a triggering mechanism, because there are literally, hundreds of thousands of people that are seeing UFOs all around the world. Seeing this object in the sky will trigger you to question your reality and that, are we alone? But it triggers you within a materialist paradigm. because you're seeing a physical object in the sky. Okay, but once you begin to have these what I call these experiences via the contact modalities, multiple experiences via the contact modalities, like, for example, Dr. Melinda Greer, then you begin to question that these experiences might not be purely physicalist um, experiences, that they might be a little bit more complicated. And then you start on a journey to begin to study and to research the topic of what is now called consciousness research, and in terms of the nature of our reality. And you start getting into, parapsychology. You start buying books by Dr. Dean Radin. You're starting to get influenced by Dr. Edgar Mitchell, by the second book of Dr. Passport to the Cosmos by the medical doctor. Goodness, my Alzheimer's is kicking in. Who wrote about that these individuals might be having, Dr. John Mack, okay, that these individuals might be having multidimensional experiences. You begin to read the books of Dr. Jacques Vallée, because he's been talking about what I'm saying for 40 years, that these might not be necessarily physical experiences from ETs or aliens from another planet, okay? That these might be interdimensional experiences involving a manipulation of space-time, okay? You begin to start reading, questions about quantum physics and consciousness. And then that path takes you into having a better understanding that our reality is a little bit more complicated than what we think it is. Okay, and what we're trying to do in our book is to present, for example, here you have this man, Dr. Jeffrey Kripal. Okay, he's a professor of religion and philosophy at Rice University in Texas. Now, Rice is like a little Harvard. You need like a 1,500 to be admitted into that school. Okay, extremely difficult school, very elite school. So he's been a professor there for close to 30 years. And now he's a dean at Rice University. This man has written 10 books, all in the field of the paranormal and consciousness. As a matter of fact, several years ago, he wrote a book jointly with Whitley Strieber. And he also wrote another book of this well-known lady who had a near-death experience. And so he wrote the prologue for our book. Why? Because he's told me that what we're doing with this organization and with this book is a paradigm changing book. Okay, it's going to totally flip how humanity views reality if they actually read it and begin to understand it. Okay, we also have, as I said before, the whole topic of introducing individuals to the topic of consciousness, the primacy of consciousness, that everything begins and ends with consciousness. That's usually a topic affiliated with philosophy, specifically with the philosophy of the mind. And there's a whole debate on this whole aspect of consciousness within that particular unique field. So what we're doing is we're taking it outside of this philosophy field, and we're extending it to all of the paranormal, okay? And then, as I said before, we have these articles based off Edgar Mitchell's article on non-local consciousness, telepathy, and the quantum hologram. Again, these are very difficult reads. They're not easy reads. We also have another section on near-death experiences and the survival of consciousness. Those articles are written by a who's who. For example, this woman who received the PhD from New York University, Dr. Sharon Hewitt Rowlett. She was one of the runner-ups, if you consider winning $50,000, a runner-up, excuse me, to the Bob Bigelow Consciousness Prize. And Bob Bigelow was the man that paid MUFON hundreds of thousands of dollars for their archives. He purchased Skinwalker Ranch, okay? And within ufology, they're always discussing, Skinwalker Ranch, and also the work that that Bob Bigelow did with MUFON for many, many years. Well, we have this lady who won a major prize with the Bob Bigelow Award on Consciousness Research and the Survival of Human Consciousness. Dr. Bruce Grayson, who's the leading academic researcher on near-death experiences. He was the one that really spearheaded the whole research agenda on NDEs. Dr. Jeffrey Long, who's one of our co-editors, again, one of the major NDE researchers, and Raymond Moody. He actually developed the term near-death experiences in 1975. And then for out-of-body experiences, we have 3 articles. One is by Stephanie Schwartz, who actually developed what is now known as non-coordinate remote viewing. Some people in parapsychology refer to it as clairvoyance, being able for your consciousness to step out of your body and go to other locations and to see and to experience other locations. So Stephanie Schwartz is an academic, really, even though he doesn't have a PhD associated with his name. He's published over 100 peer-reviewed academic articles on this topic. And then we have another category about lucid dreams. For ghosts and spirits, we have Gary Schwartz, who was a tenured faculty member at Harvard. Then he became tenured at Yale. And for the last 20 years, he's been at the University of Arizona, all focusing on consciousness, the survival of consciousness. And I could go on and on. Well, for the area on hallucinogens, also called and theogenic research, we have articles by 2 professors. One is a full tenured professor at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. His name is Dr. Roland Griffiths. Okay, and he cited our book Beyond UFOs in several of his papers because he's saying that these people that were taking psilocybin, which is the ingredient in magic mushrooms, and also DMT, which is the ingredient in ayahuasca, they were having, like 50% of these people were having contact with various forms of non-human intelligence, just like the UFO book. They were describing talking to God, to an energy being described as God. Same thing as near-death experiences were describing. And then for the UFO chapter, like I said before, we're going to have over 11 articles that provides a totally radical perspective of viewing the topic of UFOs, all from a consciousness-based perspective. And then, so the book hopefully will open up people's perspective, especially the materialist, the people who are nuts and bolts, not only in the field of ufology, but in all of these other topics that I've been discussing, to begin to understand this new paradigm of consciousness and the contact modalities.
So, Ray, then let me then, would you be open and ready for some questions for any of those that might have some?
Yes, please.
Okay, so for those of you watching, please go ahead, start submitting your questions now. And if you would like to ask a question directly, just log into a Telegram group and raise your hand there. So, but the question that I would like to ask you, would then something like a, let's say, meditation kind of be the first step for somebody to start, quote unquote, maybe start realizing how consciousness plays into this?
Well, there's different ways that you could, what we're trying to get at is what is commonly called an altered state of consciousness, okay? Once you have an altered state of consciousness, then your individuated consciousness can travel to other realms, other dimensions, to other higher states of consciousness. And so there's several ways that I would recommend. One is what was described in the ancient Vedic traditions thousands of years ago, and what Dr. Stanislav Grof, one of the early parapsychologists, developed is called holotrophic breathing. And that is while you're doing deep meditation, that you would breathe very deeply and very rapidly. There's a formal technique of doing that. Just try to Google holotropic breathing. And that induces an altered state of consciousness. That was known, as I said before, many, many thousands of years ago in India, in the ancient Vedic Sanskrit writings, the Bhagavad Gita, and other similar texts. And there's actually one professor, and I can name him in particular because he's open about it now. He was very closed about it. He never spoke about it publicly, but now he is. He's a member of CCRI. He's a professor of information sciences. He's a professor of statistics and data at a major university in Canada. His name is Dr. Raul Valverde. And let me give you his story, okay, about how this particular technique. He and his wife were trying to have a child. So they went to various fertility clinics. They tried various types of techniques, and the doctors had prescribed a lot of different things. So nothing was working. Okay, they never were able to have a child. All of a sudden, a friend of Raul, Dr. Valverde, invited him to a meditation a group. And there, he didn't want to go because he's not into this stuff. So he said, come on, it'll be something new. Let's check it out. So he went. So they were doing this deep breath, holotrophic breathing techniques. And all of a sudden, as he was heavy into it, he heard a voice. Okay. And the voice told him, Raul, don't worry about your wife becoming pregnant. Okay. Within 2 weeks, she's going to tell you that she's pregnant. And then eventually, once they do the sonogram, they're going to reveal to you that it's a girl. Okay. And you're going to be naming her this name. And he gave him a name. So the man freaked out. He thought he was going crazy. He ran out of that place. Okay. And he was like, what the hell just happened? So within those 2 weeks, his wife came back to him and said, Raul, I'm pregnant. I'm pregnant. How do you know I'm pregnant? Well, I took this over-the-counter pregnancy test, and then I went to my gynecologist, and we did the pregnancy test there, and yes, I'm pregnant. So they celebrated. Okay. A few months later, the wife had a sonogram, revealed that it was a girl. Okay. Then they discussed names eventually of the girl. They wound up giving it the name that this intelligence conveyed to him. Okay. It was a voice that in his head. Well, guess what? We have 3 professors in our group. Okay. 2 of them I already mentioned before. Okay. One is Jeff Kripal, and the other one is Dr. Gary Schwartz. Those 2 also had very similar experiences of a voice telling them information. That's how they got involved in this to begin with. Okay. We have another man, a retired medical doctor, Dr. Joseph Burks. He started doing what is commonly called CE5, but Joseph and I prefer the term HICE, which is Human Initiated Contact Experiences. Okay. So he started off initially with Stephen Greer. In 1992, he was the Los Angeles representative for Stephen Greer. He lasted like 6 years with Stephen Greer. I won't go into all the negative stuff that he told me, but he basically had to leave his association with this man. And so he's been doing calling down UFOs for really since 1992. And so in 2013, he was also a member of the Dr. Edgar Mitchell FREE Foundation from the very beginning. So in 2013, I began to talk to him about the nature of this phenomenon. And I was telling him about some of my hypotheses. And I could go into some of those later on. And so we shared very mutual hypotheses about the nature of this phenomenon. We both shared the vision that these experiences that we were having were holographic projections, and that these were virtual reality holographic projections. So it was about 4 years ago, we had a very in-depth conversation of that topic. And so I asked Joseph, I said, look, Joseph, I plan to write a book, the book that we're doing now. I said, can you begin to put your ideas on paper, to write a paper, a very detailed, complex paper with all the literature of the field of ufology to elaborate on your hypothesis. And his paper, which is going to be in our book, is titled The Virtual Reality Model of UAP Contact. Okay. And so that's just an illustration of some of the complexities that we're going to be talking about in our book. And so many of the people that have written chapters in our book, they're also experiencers. Many individuals might not never have heard of their personal experiences, but many of them are now, like Kathleen Martin and Whitley Strieber, beginning to talk to the consciousness-based and spiritual aspects of their experiences. Are there any questions?
No, no, they are. I'm sorry. I was the way you were speaking. I thought there was more coming, and so sorry for the pause. Okay, well, let's start with the first question. This one is from Mr. Catfish 2100. Says, "Who are the tall grays?"
Who are the tall grays? That gets into a complicated response. Okay. First of all, let me introduce that answer by saying that we interviewed both in surveys, quantitative surveys and qualitative survey instruments, over 4,300 people. We literally had thousands upon thousands of different types of beings that people were describing. Okay. We had, for the grays, we had the short grays and we had the tall grays. We had human-looking beings, we had energy beings, we had mantid beings, we had reptilians. Well, guess what? The number one type of beings that people were seeing were not the grays. They were actually the energy being at 57%. Number two was the human-looking being. Okay. And again, the human-looking beings were described as little tiny, people, to people that were 17 feet tall. Some of them were wearing Roman tunics, other as different types of outerwear, and some of them were black, some of them were Asian, some of them were the blue-haired, blonde-eyed types. Same thing with what is considered the gray category. Okay, we literally had hundreds and hundreds of different types of grays being, just like animals. Like, for example, you name the animal, people were seeing. We even had someone that described in detail a joint mutual experience with their friend, something that looked like a big gigantic mucus that was clinging to the corner of their living room and communicating with them telepathically. Okay. What many of these individuals were told by this intelligence, this varied group of intelligence, was that they can appear to us as humans in many different formats. Okay. Also, what many of us have come to hypothesize, together with the godfather of ufology, Jacques Vallée, okay, that these experiences are not physicalist experiences. You actually are not seeing a physical gray from our 3D reality. It might be a being that whose nature comes from, let's say, the 4D reality, where we are experiencing out-of-body experiences, where we're experiencing remote viewing, astral travel type of experiences. That these are interdimensional type of experiences by a non-human intelligence. The problem, and that was the theory also held by Dr. Allen Hynek at the very end of his life. Okay, but materialist ufology has never accepted this theory. Why? Because they're materialists. Because if you can't put it in a test tube, okay, you can't duplicate it, then it's not real. But yet quantum physicists have known about the nature of consciousness since quantum physics first was started. As a matter of fact, most of the early quantum physicists that eventually won Nobel Prize in quantum physics, all of them eventually came about saying that consciousness is primary. So that means that what we are interacting with in our 3D physical reality is an illusion, okay? That it's much more complicated than that. So in terms of these tall grays, I said, get over with, okay? It's not one subspecies that's coming from a tall gray planet, okay? That this is something way, way more complicated, that these are consciousness-based experiences. And if you really want to get a fundamental understanding of some of this literature, you could read Jacques Vallée's book titled Dimensions. You could also read his book Revelations, or Operation Trojan Horse, or Passport to Magonia. Okay, these are topics that Dr. Vallée was introducing over 40 years ago. He doesn't hold the ET hypothesis that this is a physical being coming from a physical planet, that this is something much more complicated, that these are interdimensional experiences. And he says the problem is that we just don't understand space-time. Okay. Now, all of these experiences, all of the contact modalities, involves a manipulation of space-time. And I could go into that, later on in terms of those details, some of the data from the UFO research study.
Well, we might as well get it over with now, if you don't mind, while we're on the same thread.
Okay, all right. So our book, Beyond UFOs, I'm giving away over almost 500 pages from that book, the entire book, okay, as separate PDF files for free, okay, for free, okay. What you need to do is send me an email to info@agreaterreality.com. Info, INFO, @agreaterreality.com. And I will send you the vast majority of our book, including a peer-reviewed academic research paper that was published by myself and 3 retired professors in the Journal of the Society for Scientific Exploration. And that's a journal that Jacques Vallée has published in the past. And let me discuss the 4 major research findings of our book. Our book is 820 pages in length, okay? We spent 5 years doing this research study. Now, this research study is the world's first and only comprehensive academic statistical research study on UFO contact experiencers that was done in multiple languages and administered all throughout the world. We had responses from over 125 countries, okay? And huge numbers, 4,300 people responded to it. And if you were to say, Ray, okay, you've got tons of data, what would be the 4 major ones? The 4 major ones is we wanted to study whether these experiences were positive, negative, or neutral. Because you go into the internet and you listen to these UFO conferences and you hear these so-called researchers talking about how negative this is, okay? How horrible it is. Bud Jacobs and Hopkins and Bud Hopkins. First of all, these people, their data did not come from any statistical data. Their data came from hypnotic regressions. And these are pre-selected people. They only pre-selected people whose experiences were negative to begin with. And that came directly from an article by Carol Rainey, who was married to Bud Hopkins for over 10 years, okay? She talked about how that whole phenomenon was orchestrated, okay, via their hypnotic regressions, okay? I won't go into those details of her article. So this is someone that was there interviewing people, video recording these hypnotic regressions, and she was able to see firsthand how biased their research was. David Jacobs has stated that he has never met anyone with a positive UFO experience, okay? Not one person. But yet our research studies showed that towards the very end, when they were answering our surveys, 96% did not view their experiences as negative, Okay, only 4% viewed their experience as negative. So that really just shows how BS their research is, but yet that's the prevailing view in ufology. Okay, so we asked that question of positive, negative, neutral more than 25 different ways, because depending on how you phrase a question, you'll get a different response. So we asked this question, for example, if you could stop your experiences right now, would you? Well, 86% said no. Keep it coming, baby. Keep it coming. So if this was just so horrible and negative, why did 86% said no, don't stop it? Okay. Um, we had a fixed choice questions. That means that you had to either answer one way or the other in order to continue with the survey. And that was, do you view these experiences as negative? Well, guess what? Only 4% viewed that as negative. However, initially, in the very beginning of their experiences, 37% viewed their experiences as highly negative, okay, which is a very large number. But then what we determined was that the overwhelming majority of these individuals were having multiple contact experiences over the years, okay? The largest category was more than 20 of these experiences, and that was 40% of the people. 40% of these people had more than 20 contact experiences. So we were able to determine that the more experiences you had, the more positive was your perspective of your initial experiences, and your experiences changed. Okay. On the topic of abductions, what we were able to discover was that only 1/3 of these people had what is commonly called an abduction. That means a forced taking to another location or another reality. Okay, that's only 1/3. But yet the field of ufology believes that all UFO contact is abduction related. Well, that's a false premise. Now, out of those that were abductees, okay, 70% of the people who had an initial abduction experience now call themselves contactees. Okay, 70% of the people that had an abduction experience. Why? Because their experiences changed, and their view of their initial experience changed as well over time. They got to say, okay, I was on a table, they were physically inspecting me, but these experiences were not negative. They didn't do any damage to me. I might have been scared straight, scared like hell, when they were doing this. But now all of a sudden, what we discovered was that many of these people were now interacting with human-looking beings. They were being brought to other realities. Okay, they were being shown the spirit world. Okay, like Whitley Strieber. Okay, like Kathleen Martin. Like so many of the experiencers in our book. Half of the people that I spoke that were written up in Bud Hopkins' books, half of these people now call themselves contactees. They've been brought to other realities, other dimensions. Okay, so that was one area that the overwhelming number of these people, when they answered our survey questions many, many years later, viewed their experiences as highly positive, just like Kathleen Martin and Whitley Strieber. The other area that we found out was that materialist ufology just talks about the physical aspects of the phenomenon. Okay. Now, like in my case, I physically have called down 4 UAPs. So I've physically seen them with my eyes. Okay. I have seen an energy being in my living room. So physically, I have seen a physical non-human intelligence. Okay. But the overwhelming number of my experiences over a 4-year period can be categorized as paranormal in nature, in terms of out-of-body experiences, being brought to other realities by a non-human intelligence and given spiritual lessons of our cosmology, lessons of consciousness. Okay, seeing deceased people. Okay, so these experiences are not discussed in the field of ufology, but yet once we looked at all of the survey responses from all the 4,300 individuals, we discovered that the overwhelming percentage of their experiences were not physical. They were paranormal in nature. And let me give you some example. 80% of these people were having out-of-body experiences. 80%, 8 out of 10. 37% had at least one near-death experience. 67% were seen a deceased person. Okay? 67, 2 out of every 3. Out of those people, 60% actually communicated with that deceased person. Okay? 63% have seen orbs, not via picture or a video, but an actual person, an orb. Orbs that went through windows, through walls, etc. And you named the so-called paranormal phenomenon, aports of things mysteriously appearing in your living room, of books flying around, other poltergeist type of activities. Okay. It was huge, the numbers of people that were having these paranormal experiences. So, and they weren't having one type. They were having the whole smorgasbord, the whole cornucopia of the paranormal experiences, like Dr. Melinda Greer that I described before, or in my case. And so that was the second conclusion, that these experiences should not be viewed as physical experiences. They should be viewed as psyche and consciousness-based experiences. Okay, and that gets back to that question of the other gentleman who talked about, what do you think about these tall grays? Okay, the third major conclusion was that these experiences involve in a total transformation of the individual. And I discussed that earlier when I told you that we took 70 questions from Dr. Kenneth Ring's study from his book Beyond, the Omega Project. And we discovered that these people made a total radical transformation for the positive, okay? In terms of spirituality, not fearing death. They weren't concerned about material things. They became more ecologically friendly. They became much more loving, much more caring, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So that was the third major finding. The fourth major finding is that these experiences involve what is commonly called a manipulation of space-time. Okay? We discovered that 50% of these people were brought to other realities by non-human intelligence. 50%. In my case, I could go into the details, but it would take too long to describe it. I was brought to another reality where I was shown the relationship between consciousness and all the paranormal contact modalities. That's what led for me to begin to research this phenomenon and eventually to write this book, because I was brought to this other reality where I was taught all these things. And 50% of these people were brought to other realities. Okay, so these are people. In order to take our survey, you have to first of all have seen a physical UFO. Secondly, you have had to have had some type of contact with non-human intelligence. Okay, and what we discovered was that 80% of these people had physically seen a physical being. Okay, and the other 20% were people that only had telepathic communications. But the overwhelming majority have had both. They've seen a physical being and have gotten telepathic communications, okay, when they didn't see a being. Like I talked to you before about Dr. Raul Valverde, saying, Raul, your wife is 2 weeks going to tell you that she's pregnant, okay? Also, I didn't describe earlier before, and 50% of these people have told us that they had a miraculous medical healing. Okay? Kathleen Martin had a miraculous medical healing. Okay? She's in our book, Beyond UFOs, but at that time, she didn't want to go public with her name. Okay? But she's the story that was the woman that was cured of chronic fatigue syndrome. Okay? My dog was totally healed by an energy being in our living room. And then later on, my wife began to call down, numerous UFOs. And I eventually began to call down 4 UFOs. So this energy being healed our dog, who we were going to be euthanizing, okay, the very next day. Okay. So, and that's also, if you send me an email, I will send you our chapter on medical healings, on UFO medical healings. Again, the email is info@agreaterreality.org. info@agreaterreality.com. info@agreaterreality.com. So those are the four major findings. Let me summarize them real quickly. These experiences were overwhelmingly positive in nature, not in the beginning, but towards the end of their experiences when they were taking our survey. Number two, these experiences were extremely transformational, highly transformational for the positive. Okay. Number three, these experiences involve primarily psyche and consciousness-based experiences, paranormal experiences, and not necessarily physical experiences of seeing a physical being, of seeing a physical UFO. That's part of the phenomenon, but that's not the overwhelming majority of the phenomenon. Number four, these experiences involve a manipulation of space-time. Just like when people see a deceased person, that's a manipulation of space-time. Here you having the consciousness of this deceased person is physically appearing in our reality. In a near-death experience, your consciousness is going to a higher reality, okay, where you're seeing deceased relatives, where you're interacting with a being that people associate with God, where you're being given a life review. You're being shown all the good things you've done in your life and all the bad things you've done in your life, et cetera, et cetera. So that involves a manipulation of space-time where your consciousness is being brought to another reality. By definition, when you are having an out-of-body experience, or you're doing astral travel, or you're doing remote viewing, okay? By definition, there's a manipulation of space-time because your consciousness is outside of your 3D physical reality. You're seeing your body underneath you, but yet you're going around the neighborhood, checking it out as via a conscious being. When you're doing remote viewing, your mind, your consciousness is physically outside of your body, and you might be like some of the early remote viewers going to a secret Russian military factory where they're building the latest model of a nuclear submarine. Okay, that's a true story. That's how the CIA eventually awarded the Stanford Research Institute a contract on remote viewing, because they were able to go in there and to identify the submarine sub that's being built. That was verified by a spy who was in that submarine factory that verified exactly what these remote viewers were telling them. Okay, so again, it involves a manipulation of space-time where your consciousness is outside of your 3D reality, but yet you are seeing, you are hearing, your senses, like your normal five senses would be, but you're doing it outside of the 3D reality. Okay, you're doing outside of space-time. So those are the four major conclusions of our book, but yet almost nobody has read our book. Nobody cares. They'd rather read another story about Rendlesham Forest, about Roswell, about a new metal that was discovered, the new TikTok video. So my response to that is, what have we learned over the last 80 years of approaching the field of ufology from a strict materialist perspective? What have we really learned? My response is very little. But yet, what have we learned by the 820-page book, Beyond UFOs? Okay? A lot. Okay? A lot of things that are very, very complex. But if you approach it from a materialist perspective, you're not going to accept it.
Thank you for that, Ray. So the next question I have is from George Hernandez, asking, can past lives be considered a form of time travel in a non-linear time frame?
Well, a lot of people that have had near-death experiences describe the past life phenomenon. Okay, the past life phenomenon was studied academically by this professor at the University of Virginia School of Medicine. So this is a professor of psychiatry who all of a sudden, the guy they invented the Xerox machine died. And he had met with the University of Virginia beforehand. Says, "Look, I'm going to leave you millions of dollars, but I want this money to go into someone who's going to study reincarnation." Okay, so the University of Virginia approached Dr. Ian Stevenson, said, "Look, we got this very wealthy man, invented the Xerox machine, and he wants to leave us with millions of dollars, which we can give to you because we know that you have an interest in these topics, in consciousness of the paranormal, ESP, etc." And so Dr. Ian Stevenson accepted it, and he began, I believe it was in 1962, at the University of Virginia, the Division of Perceptual Studies. Okay, that organization eventually grew to have, I think, 7 or 8 professors. Most of these people came from leading academic institutions. And then from there, Dr. Bruce Grayson developed the NDE literature. He began to do all of these academic research studies on experiencers of NDEs. And then before Dr. Stevenson passed away, he hired Dr. Tucker, Jim Tucker, to continue with his work on reincarnation. And so Dr. Stevenson published, I think it was 2 or 3 major books which had hundreds of case studies of the field of reincarnation. But the field of NDE research also reveals the whole aspect of reincarnation as well. A lot of NDE experiencers discuss that. Okay. Now, in terms of past lives and time travel, okay, again, I'm not a physicist. I could only tell you what physicists in our organization have told me, including Edgar Mitchell, who got a PhD in aeronautical engineering and from MIT, which is one of the leading scientific universities in the world. And so they all told me, it says, "Ray, time doesn't exist, because it's folded into Einstein's concept of space-time. So space doesn't exist and time does not exist." Okay. Now, individuals are able to experience past lives via what Edgar described in his model, via non-local consciousness. Just like you could experience precognition of a future event that's going to happen. And let me give you an illustration, okay? People that have had contact via near-death experiences, UFO contact, seeing ghosts and spirits, any of these contact modalities, all of a sudden it's like their consciousness is opened up to other types of experiences, okay? Let me give you an example. My wife disappeared right in front of me in my living room when I had that experience with that energy being in my living room. She had 1 hour of missing time. She was gone. Okay, and then when she was returned with our dog was fully healed. Okay, fully healed. We didn't have to euthanize her later that afternoon. Okay, she was like running around like a little puppy. So Edgar Mitchell described this whole process of non-local consciousness and how telepathy works. Dean Radin, in his many books, was able to describe precognition, how that might work via what is commonly described as ESP. So a lot of people, via this process of non-local consciousness, are able to tap in to their past lives. All of a sudden, you might be meditating. Okay, you go into these deep meditations or holotropic breathings, and all of a sudden, you're in a past life. Okay, you might be a Native American, and you might be witnessing how you were killed by another tribe in a battle, and you're experiencing everything. Okay, like you're in that person's body, and you're seeing, you're smelling, you're feeling. So a lot of these people that have these past life type of experiences, what it is that their consciousness is leaving their physical 3D body and they're going into these higher realms, okay? Just like astral traveling, okay? And um, your mind, not your brain, but your mind, your consciousness mind, is traveling to these other realities where you're tapping into via the skills of perception, resonance, coherence, um, uh, describing how non-local consciousness works into this other reality of past lives. So I guess it's a long explanation of explaining that yes, past lives is very real. It's been fully documented from many, many different approaches, and that reincarnation seems to exist. And many ancient cultures, from all of the mystical cultures to indigenous cultures, they all talk about reincarnation. Okay, so again, these are mysteries that humanity is just beginning to discuss these topics in a scientific framework. They have been discussed in oral cultural traditions for thousands of years. But now these academics, these scientists are beginning to discuss these things from an academic perspective. There really is no explanation that proves these things because, as I said earlier, you can't get these topics and put them in the test tube and duplicate them again. Okay, how could you duplicate consciousness? Um, and so anyway, I hope that addresses a little bit your question.
Thank you for that, Ray. Yeah, Labels 369 had a question, but then later on the bottom answered the question answered thanks. So there you go. Already doing the future skip and getting that taken care of. So I have a Polly over Telegram who would like to ask a question. So Polly, you are unmuted. Unmute yourself on your end and please ask your question.
Hello, everybody. Fascinating stuff. I can't wait to get my hands on that book. And I have had a lot of unusual experiences over time. It started by seeing some UFOs, and that opened up my curiosity. And then I started learning from people, and it's been a very interesting journey for me. All kinds of experiences. But one thing I had a little curious about that I haven't really been able to find much information on is, I guess, downloads or symbols or numbers. So for me, I do this deep trance meditation with binaural beats, and I've done a lot of study how to do that, and I do it sometimes with the aid of plants medicine, and sometimes I'm bombarded with ancient hieroglyphic symbols, like rapidly, like a lot of information. A friend of mine, she started seeing UFOs. I'd tell her, why don't you politely say thank you for showing yourself and just thank you for being there. And then she started doing that. And then one day she did that. And for an hour, every time she'd close her eyes, she'd see the numbers 403 just in her face whenever she closed her eyes. And I've heard other stories about downloads. I'm wondering if it's information sent that maybe unpacks over time. Do you think you and then your colleagues maybe got downloads that led you in the direction to write this book? If you know anything about that, that'd be great. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Polly.
Polly, if you send me an email, as I said before, I will send you various chapters from our first book, Beyond UFOs. One of our chapters was specifically on what you just mentioned. Individuals that received scientific information, science information, that they had no idea how they acquired that information. Much of it involved individuals getting these downloads of physics and mathematics. And let me give you two examples, okay? One was a physicist friend of mine. I'll just say his first name, Ralph, okay? Ralph is in his 70s, and he was a childhood math and physics prodigy, okay? We had a group of 5 PhD physicists in our organization at one time, and everyone acknowledged that he was the star. Okay, this man was beyond brilliant. Okay, he told me that one time when he was 19 years old, he was camping with his girlfriend. He was in a tent, and his girlfriend was not in the tent. She was outside doing something else. And then all of a sudden, this holographic tablet appeared to him. Remember, I mentioned earlier in our conversation that these are holographic projections that we are interacting with. Okay, now mind you, Ralph has seen UFOs previous to this experience, so he's physically seen a UFO. And I remember the first time he saw it, he said, "Okay, I wish you could come back here next week so I could take a picture of you." All of a sudden in his mind, he was told, "Come back next week." Okay, 7 days later at this exact same time, bring a camera with you and we'll allow you to photo us. Okay, take a photo. Well, a week later, he was there, same exact time. Okay, was able to take a picture of it. And then while he was there, he says, "Okay, if you're real, if this is not an illusion, I want you to go to the right." And it went to the right. "Okay, now I want you to go back to your original spot, to the left." Boom, it went back to the left. And so he already had seen UFOs, this man. So anyway, what appeared in his tent was like a huge Apple tablet, okay? But it was holographic. It was see-through. And what it was scrolling down was all this advanced physics. So I asked him, I said, "Ralph," I said, "what the hell were you able to understand it?" He said, "Ray, I was able to understand the majority of it, but not all of it, okay?" And I said, "Well, what was it conveying to you?" He says, "The best way to me to be able to explain it is Einstein utilized these equations by this very famous physicist. I think his first name is Stephen Maxfield. They're now known as Maxwell's field equations. Okay, so they lay out the very foundations of modern physics." So he said, if you could imagine, Ray, Einstein getting Maxwell's field equations and turning to the right, this was Einstein turning to the left. It was a total radical application of his equations. And so, and Ralph told me that it lasted maybe, 10 minutes or so, and then poof, it just disappeared right in front of him. Now, let me fast forward to one of my best friends. He's one of the major contact experiencers in the world, but nobody knows about him because he's not public. Okay. This man is a retired DEA agent. He was the main person to bring down Manuel Noriega from Panama because he was shipping in tons of cocaine. And also baby Doc Duvalier from Haiti and his brother-in-law, who was also bringing in tons of coke. Okay. So this man is the real deal. I've seen all his certificates. He also wrote a book recently titled Chasing Dictators. Okay. His wife has also experienced many of these experiences with him. Okay. Alberto told me that one time he was in the living room, like many of his experiences start, he's watching TV. Okay. All of a sudden, right in front of him appears, again, holographically, this holographic tablet. The lettering, he said, was red lettering. And he said that it was like maybe 3 feet in height, tall. And it was scrolling down all this advanced mathematics and physics, okay? And then all of a sudden, he called his wife, yelling at his wife to see if she could see it. So his wife is a PhD psychologist, okay, for over 35 years. And also a major experiencer as well, like him. But he's the big enchilada here. His experiences have been unbelievable. And so she was there and she didn't see it. He was the only one that was seeing it. So then she was telling him, talk to it, ask it questions. And he was asking questions, telepathically, even verbally. It wouldn't respond. And so these things would continue to scroll down and appear in front of him. And so I said, "Well, what happened, Alberto?" And he said, "Well, after half an hour, I just walked away." I said, "What, are you kidding me? You just left it?" He says, "Ray, I don't know anything about physics or mathematics, and this is boring. I'm not going to stay around here. I got things to do. It's Saturday afternoon, I got things to do." And he left. So here we have separation of more than 20 years by these two different individuals telling us the very same exact experience. Okay. And so in our book, we describe people that were getting, mathematics downloads, science downloads, new contraptions, new free energy, downloads, and how to build this, how to build that, and it was written by Dr. John Clemo, one of our professors, with this woman Susan Manowich, who has a master's in science. And what they did is they took many of the case studies in our book and they wrote it out as a chapter. So if you send me an email to info@agreaterreality.com, info@agreaterreality.com, and mention that specific chapter, I will send it to you for free, together with the other chapters that I normally send out for free on our book, including the chapter on medical healings, and chapters 1, which is an analysis of the quantitative statistical data, and chapter 2, which is an analysis of the qualitative statistical data. As I said before, there's more than 450 pages from our book, and I'll send it to you for free. So it's info@agreaterreality.com. Any other questions?
Right. Yeah. There's one more question, and we'll make that the last one. I just wanted to see, because I'm looking at the description. So is it that as of April 1st that you're going to have info@agreaterreality.org?
Correct. Our website is, that's my email, info@agreaterreality.com, not .org.com. Okay.
Okay.
And that's our my email. Now, in terms of our website, the website is going to be agreaterreality.com.
Right.
Agreaterreality.com. So that will be opened as of April 1st.
Good deal. Well, just also letting you know, the email you sent me both said .org. So if you're copying that email to someone else, please make that correction. So I will make the changes in the description so everyone has the accurate links for you then.
Fantastic. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, no problem. All right. Well, so the final question is from Edgar, and he's asking, thank you all. You're doing both. You're both doing. I guess he's trying to say thank you all for what we're both doing. Your thoughts on any human being who can allow a star being to speak through them using the specific star language. Does that make sense?
Well, I heard.
I wonder if he's talking about channeling.
Channeling. Yeah, channeling, I guess, is the more common usage for that. And I am kind of apprehensive on channeling. Okay. Because I've met a lot of people who say that they do channeling, and a lot of not accurate information is being conveyed. Because I would ask them, think particular about me and my family and other people, and they would just be totally wrong. Just like people that can do readings, I guess the most common stereotypical is you go to this lady with this glass ball, and they give you readings about yourself and your family and your future, and but yet I've met some people that are excellent channelers, and people that receive excellent information when they read. One is this lady who I consider one of the top 3 experiencers in the world. She's written a chapter about her experiences. Her name is Ruth Ann Friend. And so we were in Illinois, where she lives. And this is the second day. This is an elderly lady in her 80s. And so she was very, very tired. It was 10:30 at night. I said, "Oh my God, Ruth Ann, I forgot that you were supposed to give us a reading, a psychic reading." She goes, "Oh, Ray, I usually do this in the morning when I'm, refreshed. I have more energy." And so I said, "Well, just 5 minutes, Ruth Ann. I just want to be able to get it on tape, for our documentary." And so, and she said, "Okay, who's the person that you want me to read?" So I didn't give her one person. I gave her 3 people. Okay. My wife, my daughter, and my father. And she told me intimate details of these individuals that no one would ever know about. For example, she knew that my wife had a brain aneurysm, and that that surgery that they did on her, she said, don't even think about it. She's completely healed. And I was like, how did this woman know that, right? And so then, in terms of my daughter, she said that my daughter was going to be studying science, all of her life, like science, science, science. And she stops and she goes like this because she listens to her deceased son. Okay. And so then all of a sudden, more science, more, my God, right? Your daughter's going to be studying science all her life. And then she stops and she starts laughing. She says, your daughter's going to be a healer. She's going to be a medical doctor. That's exactly what my daughter wants to do. She wants to be a medical doctor. And she got a full academic scholarship to study science at a major, extremely well-known university. Okay. And then in terms of my father worked in a factory for over 35 years. Okay. And then his lone hobby was raising canaries. Our house was filled with close to 100 canaries. Always my mother was fighting with him because my mother was a very, very clean woman, wanted everything meticulously clean. And they were like bird feathers all over the place. But that was my father's hobby. He worked 12 hours a day, 6 days a week in a factory, in an embroidery factory. So when he would come home, he'd be totally exhausted, and so raising canaries was his hobby. And the whole living room had all these trophies from all the awards and competitions on his canaries. So this woman is doing a reading on my father. She goes, oh, he's very proud of you. So, okay, that's normal stuff. Oh, you worry too much about him. Okay, that's normal stuff. You would tell it to anybody. She goes, Ray, and she's listening to her son, right? And she says, my son conveyed to me a video of a man opening up a small bird cage, and a little bird is flying around the living room. She said, why did they give that to me? Why did he give me that information? And I said, oh my God, Ruth Ann, that was my father's passion. He used to raise canaries. That was the only thing he really cared about. And besides his family, and so that to me was like proof. With these 3 readings of my wife with her aneurysm, with my daughter with the medical school and science, and my father with opening up a little bird cage and a little bird comes out, proof that this lady was very, very real. So what is commonly called psychic reading, I don't dismiss it anymore because this woman was able to, prove it right to me directly. And so channeling is like a form of psychic reading, except you're getting information from another location, whether you might want to call it the spirit world or what have you. Okay, it's the same process that Edgar Mitchell discusses about in terms of non-local consciousness. So I know the phenomenon is very real, but there's a lot of charlatans out there. There's a lot of wannabes, which tend to discredit the field and the phenomenon, but it's very real.
Great. Well, Ray, thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. And also thanks to everyone else that participated in asking questions. I hope you got your answers. Ray, in conclusion, I just want to leave you with the last word before we finish up.
Well, I will give anyone that sends me an email roughly half of our book, our first book, Beyond UFOs, and I will also send you 7 chapters from our new book, A Greater Reality, okay? Or 8 chapters. Roughly 4 of them are theoretical and 4 of them are from experiencers. So that'll give you a good sense of what the book is all about. And you can see just how important our book is, because we're going to be introducing a new paradigm of how individuals can view the relationship between consciousness and what I coined the contact modalities. So once again, the email is info@agreaterreality.com. info@greaterreality.com.
All right. Yeah, we'll definitely make those corrections in the description. Of course, all of that is in the description below, both the websites. As soon as we're done, I will make that correction, and all of you out there will have that information. But I'm certainly hoping that you will join us and get to meet Ray, and you see me there myself as well at the conference. And it's usually a very fun event. I think the very first time I met you, Ray, was in 2019 at that conference, and I'm glad you're back again.
Well, that I've been invited to speak at about 6 different conferences, all of them UFO related. And that conference by far was the best organized conference. And I met so many major experiencers at that conference. And I really, and I'm also, I didn't mention this before, but I deeply admire the work of Dolores Cannon, because she clearly understood what was consciousness and the nature of our reality, and but she approached it from a metaphysical perspective through the experiencers. But so she really had the visions, the keys to be able to understand our reality, and so I look forward to appearing at the conference, meeting her daughter as well, and to meeting you as well. And so, thank you very much.
Oh, great, Ray. Thank you again. So in the description as well, there's going to be the link where you'll be able to purchase your tickets for the upcoming conference. If for some reason you cannot make it, of course, there's streaming available. And again, all the corrections for the info at agreaterreality.com will be made below. And also, I've included an Amazon link that right now only has the Beyond UFOs book as well, if you're interested in purchasing it, or you take up Ray's offer and have him send you a few chapters if you email him. So again, Ray, thank you very much. Everyone else watching, thank you as well. And we'll do this again sometime.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Take care, everyone.